This is the web page that we ended off last class with, so that was October 2nd, 2018. In this video I'm going to go through everything that we did to get to this point. So that's going to include explaining how borders, margins, and padding work in HTML objects. I'm also going to introduce something else new, and that is the display style element that determines how how objects fit in with the rest of the page. So let's switch back to our beginning point. This is the page that we keep starting with every time we go into something new. So first off, I'm going to add a style background colors to this heading and this paragraph, so that we can see the space that they take up. So style is equal to background, pink for the top one, style is equal to background, let's say yellow, save it, and let's turn that live on. So there we go. So one thing I want you to note right now is that both of these items take up the full width of our page. So this paragraph and this heading are using the display type of a block. So what that means is that by default it will take up the full width of a available space, but you can assign a height and a width to it. Like so. So let's back that up and just get rid of that and go back to where I'm going to go ahead and make my paragraph taller so that I can demonstrate the next point. The next one I want to demonstrate is inline elements, and the easiest ones to demonstrate that with would be something like bold or italicized. So let's just insert a bold with some text. Okay. Oops, forgot to finish my closing. So this is bold in the middle. Of a paragraph. So this bold tag being an inline element means that we can't assign different sizes to it. So let's start by giving it a different background color from what it's sitting on top of. Style is equal to background, and let's just make it light blue. Okay, so we've inserted light blue background with bold text in the middle of our paragraph. So remember again, our paragraph is a block element, and this bold tag in the middle is just an inline element. So let's try and add a height to it. Let's call that 50 pixels. I save it, and it has no effect. The third type of display I want to demonstrate is the inline block. So I'm going to just put in another paragraph. Let's just make it red. Okay, so a red background. So what we're going to do is just insert an image in the middle of our paragraph. Source is equal to G. Alternate is equal to Sica. There we go. So notice how it's in line with our texts. But here's the thing. We can add a height. We could make it the same height as our text if we so desired. Okay, so there we go. So just a quick review. Our heading, our paragraphs, are block elements, which mean by default the width is 100% of what's available. We can assign heights and widths to it. The next point was our inline element, which we demonstrated with the bold, which means that we cannot assign height and width. It is determined solely by the content of it. So another quick note on that is that if we go to our bold section back here, we can change the font size, even though we can't change the size of the container directly. Remember, we can do that percent or pixels. And then the last one is the inline block, meaning that it acts like a piece of text which is just flows with the rest of it, but we can directly change its size this time. Let's go back to this point and look how we can assign those display types manually to any piece of HTML. So let's start out by just talking about one interesting point of HTML is that you can use any tag that's not pre-assigned with any styles and then assign all of the styles yourself. So let's just say like my tag. So in the HTML definition, there is no such thing as a element called my tag. Okay? So you see that is just going to be treated like a inline element. So that's why you'll notice that the background here is only as wide as it needs to be to cover the text. We can do the same thing here. My tag. My tag. Again, remember, this is not defined anywhere in HTML. This my tag is just one that we made up to demonstrate how our display types work. So you'll notice I set them both to this my tag. It's treating them as inline. So they just put them all in one line as if they're two pieces of text. If I wanted one of these to act like a paragraph, say the top one, I could just add into here display block. There, it pushes it out to the whole width. Notice there's no white space in that between the two lines, and that's because there's no padding or margins assigned to these elements right now. Remember, every style point we have to assign on its own. So we could take put our second one inside of that one, and you'll notice that it puts it in line with the other text, the content of the first my tag, but applies the styles that you gave to it. So now, because we told it to be a block, we could give it height and width, 50 RTX. That makes that bigger. So let's look if we make the second one to be inline block. So unless we add more style elements, we don't actually notice a difference. But so now it's inline block. We can give it a height of 20. Well, let's make it better. Let's go like 40. Okay. Let's drop the height from our containing element and see what happens. So if we take out the height for our first block element, it will make itself tall enough to contain our sub element. The next three important style elements that I want to discuss is the border, the margin, and the padding. The border is the easiest one to describe, and that's going to be an area around your element. You can give it a width and a style and a color. The next one is the margin. That one's going to be the area around your element outside of the border between it and neighboring objects, the edge of parent element. The third one is padding, and that's going to be the distance from the edge of the element inward towards the content of your element. To demonstrate this, I'm going to add another one of these in here. Within the yellow one, style, let's give it a background of green and make its display inline block as well. Put some content in it. Oops. And close it off. Oh, it should be an equal sign. There we go. I'm also going to get rid of the height here that I assigned, and I'm going to get rid of the content of the other two as well. So now that there's no content other than the content of the green one, that's the only content we see. But you see, we still see the pink is full width, so I'm going to turn that into an inline block as well. Oops. Okay, so now the yellow and the pink are behind. The one that I want to demonstrate border, margin, and padding on is going to be the yellow one. When we add a margin to the yellow one, we will see some of the pink exposed, as it needs to be big enough to contain the yellow and the green and the margin. And then if we add padding to the yellow, we will see some of the yellow exposed, because that means we have space from the edge of the yellow one to the edge of the green one, which is the content of the yellow one. And then when we add a border, we will see a border around the yellow. Let's start with the padding. Let's just say padding and give it a size in pixels. Let's say 30 pixels. We save it, and then we get 30 pixels from the edge of the yellow to the edge of the green. Let's show next our margin. Let's give it 30 pixels as well. There we go. So we see our 30 pixel margin in the pink, we see our 30 pixel padding on the yellow, and then we see our content on the inside. Always keep in mind that you can always break lines of HTML up. So let's make a new line to demonstrate our borders. The easiest border to assign is just to give it a style. We can just say border solid. So if we just write border solid, that uses our default color and the default width and just makes a solid border. Some of the other styles is dotted and dashed, double, and so on. We'll have a little bit more look at that later, but for example, dashed, that gives us a dashed border around it. We can also, in the same line, give it a width. So let's just say like 15 pixels. Save that. There's 15 pixel wide. And we can also give it a color. So there we have a 15 pixel wide orange border. It's not so easy to see on the yellow, so we'll make it red. We can count up the total distance from the inside of our content all the way to the outside of our pink. From the green to our red border is going to be the distance of our padding, which was 30 pixels. From that padding to the pink is going to be the width of our border, which is now 15 pixels. And then another 30 pixels for margin from the border to the edge of the pink. So we'll have a total of 75 pixels from the edge of the green to the edge of the pink. We can also specify all of these values on each side if we so desire. And always remember, the last defined style is the one that gets used. Okay, so let's use our margin as an example. So we've said margin is 30 pixels. There's also margin left, right, top, and bottom. So let's say we wanted a wider margin to our left. Say we wanted it to be 60 pixels. So we could add a margin left 60 pixels. Save it. Now we've got 60 pixels on the left as opposed to 30 pixels on all other sides. Our padding is the same. Padding right, say, call that 100 pixels. So now we've got 100 pixels on the right from our green content to our border. Border, same thing. Oh, gee. Border bottom, say. Let's call that solid. 25. Now let's go 30 pixels. Okay, and again that used the default. With our border we can define any of the width, style, and color separately. Let's say I wanted to make the top border dotted, but I only wanted to define just the dotted but leave it red and the same width. So I could go border, top, style, dotted. Okay, so that changed it to dotted but kept the other parameters the same. When we define multiple distances for any of these, there's a shorthand format that we can use. So let's use margin as an example. So I'm going to get rid of this margin left. For margin, we can just list out the widths that we want, starting at the top and going clockwise. So if I go margin 30 pixels and then put a space, 60 pixels, 90 pixels, 120 pixels. So that's going to make the top 30, the right 60, the bottom 90, and the left 120 pixels. So there we go. You can see 30 on the top, 60 to the right, 90 the bottom, 120 on the left. If you want the top and the bottom to be one distance and the left and the right to be a different distance, we have list 2. The first will be the top and bottom. The second one will be left and right. If we list 3 numbers, we'll get the top, then the left and right, and then the bottom. So that's going to be exactly the same for the padding. So padding, there's similar shorthands for our borders for their individual components. So the same order, let's start with the border style. We can go solid, dashed. So again, if we list two, it's top and bottom, and then left and right. And then we can do border color, green, blue, orange. There, so we can list all of the, and then exactly like our margin and padding, border width, 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 40 pixels, 60 pixels. Yeah, that makes it look goofy, but you see the point. There we go. There's one more border element that I want to demonstrate, and that is our border radius. That's going to be the radius of the corners. So I'm just going to go back to a border that is solid, 5 pixels wide, and let's go with red. And you always need that semicolon after these lists or it doesn't work. This other element, our border radius, we can list that as pixels or a percentage of the container. So let's just give it a radius of 30 pixels. And you can see that gives it a nice rounded corners with a radius of 30 pixels. Let's see what happens when we change that to percent. Okay, so that doesn't give us as nice a corners because it gives you at a percent in both directions. So anything that's square will give you a nice rounded corner if you use a percentage. It becomes interesting when we use 50%. So you'll notice when we go right to 50%, it goes right to the middle of the edges and gives us a nice ellipse. So what happens when we do make our element a square? Because we used inline blocks, we can. Let's say we want a height of 150 pixels and also a width of 150 pixels. Let's actually get rid of the padding, and that allows us to set so there, when we set our size, we end up with a circle. Somewhere along the way we lost our green content because I deleted this last quotation mark after our style string in the yellow element. For something like this to be useful, it's most likely that you would want the content in the middle of that circle. So the easiest part is to center it horizontally by just in our yellow one adding text, align, center. So the next thing we're going to do, there's multiple ways that we could center our content there. The easiest is just going to be to tell that content to be the same height as our circle. So we need to make sure we have no borders, padding, or margins set for this to work. And the feature we're going to use is line height We're going to call that the same as we're going to make that height the same as the height of our circle. And we'll get rid of the color of the background. Now if we really wanted that content to be green, we could do something like add another make sure the spacing remains good. Set the background of that to be green. So this is kind of a trick way of doing it. I want you to note that if we make this longer than line, it will break. So there's other more advanced formatting options that we could use to center things in there, which we will get to later on. But from that, you should be able to go through this example and see how we ended up with this page.